Mm. Bueno, buenos días para todas y todos. Una cordial bienvenida a este evento internacional de parte del doctor Jessica Río de la Rosa, director del Instituto Internacional de Investigaciones Jurídicas de la Universidad de Cartagena, y de parte mía personalmente una cordial bienvenida a todas las personas que están asistiendo a este evento. Primero que todo, a las personas y al profesor Sean Foreman, que están conectados desde la ciudad de Miami en los Estados Unidos, y además personas conectadas desde la Universidad de Cartagena y también desde otros países. Veo que hay personas conectadas desde Italia, por ejemplo. Es un honor para mí darle la bienvenida a nuestro invitado internacional del día de hoy, el profesor Sean Daniel Foreman, que es profesor de la Barry University de Miami en Florida. El profesor Foreman es graduado en Ciencias Políticas de la Clarion University de Pensilvania, es magíster en Estudios Internacionales de la Florida International University es también doctor en ciencias políticas, de la FIU. Professor Foreman, welcome to this event. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I am extending you a big welcome from on behalf of Professor Jessica Río de la Rosa, who is the director of the International Institute of Legal Researches. That is the institution within the University of Cartagena, which is hosting this event today. Thank you very much for joining us. As I was mentioning the introduction in Spanish, you earned your BA in political science from the Clarion University of Pennsylvania and received your MA in international studies from the Florida International University, also with a graduate certificate from the Latin American Caribbean Center. And you are a doctor in political science from the Florida International University. And today you are joining us together with your students, which not from they're from your constitutional law class, to give us a presentation regarding religious rights and freedom. La dinámica del evento será la siguiente. El profesor va a hacer una pequeña, va a hacer su presentación en idioma inglés, y de mi parte habrá una traducción de los puntos más importantes de su exposición. So, Sean, I was just saying that you will be giving your presentation in English, and then I will translate the main key points. If you want to, if you are going to give a presentation of about 20 to 30 minutes, if you want to, after maybe 10 minutes of presenting, if you reach like the conclusion of a chapter of your intervention, you can just stop for a little bit, and I will provide a first part of the translation. Okay?
Okay, very well.
Entonces le damos sin más preámbulo, le damos la palabra al profesor Sean Foreman. Professor Foreman, you have the floor. Thank you again for joining us, and we are here to listen to you.
Thank you, Professor Perona. Thank you to everyone who is joining us from around the world. It looks like we truly have a global meeting happening right now live, where we are in Miami. We have people in Colombia, we have people in Italy. It is fantastic to be able to make this connection. The students in this class, this is a class called Constitutional Law. These are students earning a bachelor's degree, and many of them will go on to go to law school and earn a JD degree. But to let you know, we have students here from Miami, we have students from New York, from Chicago, from Texas, that's in this class. We have a student who is from Germany. We have a student who is from Russia. And we also have a student who is originally from Colombia. Our friend Mateo Gomez, one of our graduates, is here. We have Professor Riva. So in fact, Professor Perona, you met most of the people in this room when you visited us last year. And again, we're really pleased to have this international connection and share information on law. So with that, can you see the slide? Can you see the slide?
We can see the slides. We are hearing a strange noise. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we can see the slides, but we are suddenly hearing a very strange noise and we cannot hear you well.
It might be because I was walking around. Is this any better?
No. We were hearing you very well, but just when you changed the slide, suddenly something happened.
Okay.
Maybe there is an interference. It looks like there is some interference, maybe a mobile phone close to the connection. I don't know.
Okay, we're going to give it a shot and see. Well, what I wanted to say to you before we get into the religious freedom. Can you hear me now?
Very, very bad. Very bad, very badly, actually. We can understand what you're saying. It's like there is an interference in the connection.
It could be our internet connection. Let's try to work through it. Okay. All right. We're going to try to make this work. Okay. Can you hear me, Professor?
No. Maybe let's stop. It looks like when you were changing the slide, maybe you accidentally touched something and that went out of place.
How about now?
No. The sound, I can see you well, but the sound is very, very bad.
This is on now.
Okay. Well.
Okay. We can hear you very well right now.
Okay. Dr. Riva fixed it for us.
I now don't know how to share that.
Now, and we expected we might have some technical difficulties for the first time. And
The shares between the smiley face and the hand.
okay, now you can hear me.
Now, and then you have to click the tab that is on.
Go to-
So you have to bring it up in a separate tab.
This one.
You have to, Dr. Foreman, you have to bring up the slideshow in a tab, and then you have to share that tab. I don't like Google.
Okay, go to that one. So I know we already have lost some time and we really want to talk about religion and get to your questions. But first, I felt the need to share with you about what's happening with constitutional law and important court cases in the United States, even just yesterday. Can you hear me, Professor?
Perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So again, I felt it is a little mundane to talk about religion cases when we have very important and pressing legal issues before the Supreme Court and other courts in the United States right now. So I want to mention it, and if anyone wants to ask questions later, they can. That just yesterday, we had a hearing in the US Supreme Court about a case dealing with Donald Trump and actions when he was president and immediately after he was president. And this case is called Trump versus United States. The Supreme Court had the hearings yesterday, and we will expect them to give us a decision in the coming weeks or about 2 months. But it is an extremely important case, not just because of Donald Trump and his situation, but our Supreme Court is going to make a ruling on presidential authority and whether actions that a person takes while they're president may be immune from criminal prosecution, to give the president more latitude to take actions without being criminally charged. This is all related to 2 of the cases, now we'll just keep it there, against Donald Trump. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but also yesterday and today in New York State, there is an actual criminal trial being held on charges against Donald Trump that he engaged in business fraud, fraudulent activity through payments to a woman that he wanted to stay quiet during the campaign about their relationship. And there's an issue about whether those payments were a criminal violation and whether he should be prosecuted. But in total, there are 4 different criminal cases against Donald Trump right now, outlined on the screen. 2 of them are in state courts, one in the state of Georgia, and the bottom one, Manhattan, is the state of New York. And 2 of them are in federal courts. The US government bringing charges against Donald Trump, one for his actions on January 6, 2021, that may have prompted a riot or insurrection in the Capitol building. And 2, about him taking classified documents home with him when he was no longer president and refusing to give them back when he was subpoenaed to do so. So it is very complicated. There are 4 cases, 91 felony charges against Donald Trump. And of course, he wants to delay all of the proceedings until after the election in hopes that he gets elected again and can perhaps end the cases against him. So I had to mention this to you. What's happening in the United States is truly unprecedented, historic. The fact that a former president has any criminal charges against him was new, but we have 4 different cases. And again, it went to the US Supreme Court yesterday to have hearings on the scope of presidential power and immunity in office, a case that we've been talking about in this class as we're concerned about other historical precedents of the power of government. So I put that out there, and if Professor, you can, briefly translate to them and let them know let me know if there are questions on that.
If I press this button.
Muy bien, bueno, en esta primera parte, antes de entrar en el tema de derecho de la ponencia, el profesor nos dijo que quería comentarnos un poco, cómo está en su clase de Derecho Constitucional, acerca de la actual situación constitucional que está viviendo los Estados Unidos, y nos comentó de la audiencia que se llevó a cabo ayer en frente de la Corte Suprema en contra del expresidente Trump. La sentencia será publicada bueno, se pronunciará la Corte dentro de los próximos meses, y el tema crucial es el tema de la autoridad presidencial y la posible inmunidad de los hechos cometidos por parte de un presidente en el ejercicio de sus funciones. Y hay varios debates acerca de los varios cargos que el presidente está enfrentando. Hay 2 procesos a nivel nacional y 2 procesos a nivel federal en contra de él, entre otras cosas por los hechos del Capitolio, que creo que todos recordamos. Hay 91 acusaciones penales en contra, 91 cargos penales en contra del presidente. Y bueno, nos comentó el profesor Foreman que esta situación contexto donde ya Estados Unidos se está acercando a las próximas elecciones, es algo que no tenía antecedentes. Es la primera vez que un candidato presidencial y expresidente enfrenta una situación de este tipo, y por eso el profesor sentía la necesidad, antes de entrar en el tema directamente, siendo un profesor de Derecho Constitucional que nos habla desde Estados Unidos, presentarnos un poco este tema. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you. So now, if we move to the next slide, again, I wanted to share with you the current events and very important happenings. But if I can briefly talk about religious freedom and rights and some constitutional principles, and then we can open it up for discussion. So first, we have a slide that shows a tweet on X from the US Department of State from January 2021, in which they put out this statistic, this data that 8 out of 10 people around the world face restrictions on their global freedom. So that's the context of this discussion, where we're going to focus on the United States and aspects of religious freedom under our law. But I wanted to put in some brief global context first. And that is, when we think about laws dealing with religion and people's rights to practice and worship their religion as they want to, we have a lot of variety around the world. This list shows us this map shows us the darker the color, the more restrictions there are from governments against individuals practicing their religious faiths. And we can see the United States is actually shaded into the moderate area, meaning that we do have some moderate restrictions on people's freedoms that need to be adjudicated in the courts on a regular basis. I see that Colombia is in the low category there, so that's good news that you don't have as many confrontations on religion there. And I believe Italy as well is in the low category, so that is good. If we go to the next slide, again, just some big picture context. Most of the countries that have greater restrictions on religious freedom are found in the Middle East. The Middle East and North Africa, you can see there at the top of our graph here, showing that there are more incidences of restrictions on religious rights. So typically we do think of countries in the Middle East or in Africa that might have more restrictive governments, more direction from the government on what you can and cannot worship. Asia Pacific in the middle. The good news on this list for us is the Americas, North America and South America, very low on the list. Go ahead to the next slide, meaning that we have less restrictions on religious practices in this hemisphere. This just shows you a breakdown of world religions. Next. So with that, actually, let's skip these and let's go to skip. One thing here I wanted to also set out for big picture, and then we'll talk about some details. Then we'll translate, and then we'll talk about details. To understand law in the United States, you have to understand our federal system. Probably many of you understand federalism, where a national government has a constitution and the state governments have constitutions. They make laws. There can be variety in the laws within the country. The national government has a Supreme Court to make rulings on national laws or federal laws, and each state also has a court system to make laws and rules on on the laws in those states. So it's complicated because we have so many different levels of laws in the United States and different jurisdictions where those laws are adjudicated. And so you have to understand differences in states as well as the federal government to understand how that works. So some of the examples we'll talk about in a minute here happened because there are varieties in state laws that were in conflict with other state laws. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And Professor, do you want to give them an update on what I've said so far?
Yes, okay. Bueno, el profesor, ya entrando en el tema de la libertad religiosa, que es el tema central de la ponencia, nos mostró primero un post en X, del antiguo Twitter, de 2021, donde el Departamento de Estado de los Estados Unidos indicaba que en el mundo 8 de 10 personas tienen restricciones en su libertad religiosa, y nos mostró un mapa que han visto de diferentes colores, donde obviamente donde los colores estaban más fuertes, el rojo, por ejemplo, eran los países que más tienen restricciones en el tema de libertad religiosa. Comentó que los Estados Unidos no están en blanco, sino están en amarillo. Eso implica que hay necesidad de que el Poder Judicial intervenga algunas veces para garantizar este derecho, y comentó que, bueno, Colombia, en cambio, así como Italia, entran en blanco. Y ya después de esto, nos comentó que para más lo que viene de su exposición, teníamos que tener un poco claro que Estados Unidos son un sistema federal, y el sistema federal implica que hay una constitución a nivel federal y un sistema judicial a nivel federal, pero también hay constituciones y leyes y sistemas judiciales a nivel de estados, que serían como departamentos, pero sabemos que en los Estados Unidos son de verdad estados federados.
You can practice your Spanish when you stop.
Go on, Professor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was telling my class they can practice their Spanish as well, listening to the translation. Okay, so now down to some specifics dealing with the United States and religious freedoms. Again, on the map, it showed we have some moderate restrictions, and therefore we have a good amount of cases that end up in the courts for them to decide the balance between your right to practice your religion and the state's need to pass laws for law and order and security. Under the US Constitution, we have a set of amendments that very specifically talk about protecting the rights of individual citizens. You may know the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution are called the Bill of Rights. And the First Amendment is the most important because it deals with our basic freedoms and individual rights, dealing with religion, speech, press, to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for grievances. So these are our basic civil liberties, all mentioned in Amendment 1. But the point is that the very first item mentioned is religion. And there are two parts dealing with religion in our First Amendment. It's there for you to read and see that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the people who wrote the US Constitution felt that it was very important to specifically mention that Congress cannot make a law that does one of these two things. And number one and number two there, they cannot establish an official state religion, and we do not have an official state-sponsored religion in the United States. But they also cannot sponsor religious activities. that interfere with state actions. And secondly, your ability to exercise your religion, to practice your religion with different traditions and beliefs should be kept as free as possible. There may be restrictions on your actions if they are otherwise illegal. Go to the next slide. So the point is, religious freedom is very important in the United States. It's the first part of the amendment, and we have many cases dealing with this. The second area where religion is mentioned in the US Constitution is listed there for you to see as well. It isn't talked about as often, but we do have a specific provision in red that says there'll be no religious test given to anybody as a qualification to serve in office, to be a senator, a representative, a president. You should not be asked what your religion is, and you cannot be denied the position based on your religion. So we have specific provisions in our Constitution. Next, yeah. Again, there is no specific state religion in the United States. The example we use by contrast in Great Britain, the Church of England is a state institution. And many things in Great Britain are tied to the church. The most high profile will be the coronation of the king and the putting of the crown on the head coming from the bishop or the archbishop. That is an official church-sanctioned activity. When they started the United States, they wanted to make sure that we separated, go to the next one, church and state. So you may have heard, and I'll say this and then we'll catch up with translation. You may have heard of the phrase wall of separation between church and state, a wall to separate the government from the religious or church activities. That's an idea that came from a letter written by Thomas Jefferson. There's the letter. And again, in red, I have the important parts. That Thomas Jefferson believed we should build a wall of separation between church and state to keep them as separate as possible in the public sphere. Go to the next one. And this is because, and I'll pause after this for the update, the United States was born with many religious groups here, even though Christianity was and is the majority religion in the United States. From the founding, there were multiple different denominations of Christianity or also non-Christian religions. And so from the birth, the United States has an understanding of pluralism, a respect for different religions and churches. And secondly, the history of the United States is a history of waves of immigration, and as people migrate to this country from different parts of the world, they bring their history, culture, and tradition. And so we've had waves that have changed the religious background of the country. Catholicism being a great example, as we had waves of people from Italy and Ireland coming to the United States 100 years ago. The number of people who practiced Catholicism increased, but that also led to some new clashes with the laws in dealing with people who are Catholic versus people who are Protestant. Professor, give them an update, please.
Of course. Bueno, ya entrando en el tema normativo, se mencionó la primera enmienda de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos, que hace parte de las primeros 10 enmiendas que sabemos constituyen el listado de derechos de la Constitución. De acuerdo a esta enmienda, el Congreso no podrá pasar leyes en dos sentidos, hay dos prohibiciones. La primera prohibición es que el Congreso no podrá reconocer una religión de Estado o apoyar de manera expresa alguna particular religión. Y la segunda previsión de la enmienda es que no se podrá restringir la libertad de una persona de practicar la religión. Y esto se relaciona con lo que también prevé el artículo 6 de la Constitución, que de manera clara dice que no se puede requerir una religión para quien quiere ejercer un cargo público. Entonces, la religión no puede ser requerida para ocupar un cargo público. Y con base en esto, se establece la doctrina de la separación entre Estado y religión, un muro de separación, para usar la palabra de Jefferson, en este sentido. Y tiene sentido también en el contexto, o se enmarca en el contexto cultural de Estados Unidos, considerando que desde su fundación los Estados Unidos han tenido diferentes religiones, con una mayoría cristiana, pero igual con mucha diferencia entre las diferentes religiones del cristianismo que están presentes en Estados Unidos. Se hizo también una diferencia, una distinción con lo que, por ejemplo, dentro del sistema del común pasa en Inglaterra, donde sabemos que hay una religión de Estado por razones históricas. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you. The list that we had up there was just showing the breakdown of religions in the United States, where if you saw 70% of people identify as being Christian, whether Protestant or Catholic. In the United States, less than 2% identify as being Jewish, and less than 2% identify as being Muslim. So the truth is, the United States has a supermajority of people still today who identify as being Christian. Whether they worship on Sunday or practice throughout the year is a different story, but at least they say they're Christian and they identify with those legal protections. So let's go forward. I'm not even gonna do this, and keep going to that. Yeah, so I'm just gonna mention two cases. We could do a whole class like we're doing in this setting on these cases, but in the interest of time, I'll just mention a doctrine from the Supreme Court, and then I want to hear your questions. So everything I've just been saying to you, the United States had religious pluralism and not too many legal challenges over religious rights until the 1940s and forward, more recently. So really the first main case that the US Supreme Court deals with on religious rights is a case named Cantwell versus Connecticut from 1940. As I mentioned to you, states and state laws matter here. Without telling you all the details of the case, we want to know the outcome is that the US Supreme Court ruled that a state or a city must have a valid secular policy if they're going to apply a law that restricts your religious freedom. So the state has to explain that there's a legitimate interest in having a regulation that might restrict your religious freedom. Always the balance is what we're looking for in the law here. You want to practice your religion, the state wants to have law and order. In this case, they didn't want people prophesizing on the streets, trying to convert people to their religion. So the bottom line is, at first the court said states can have regulations as long as they prove there's a valid reason. Go to the next one. However, the burden of proof shifted from the state telling us why their reason was valid to now the state has to do more than that. They have to give a compelling reason why their law is necessary to restrict your religious freedom. So this is a case that we spoke about in our class here. Miss Sherbert worked in the state of South Carolina. She was a Seventh-day Adventist, which means Saturday is the Sabbath, holy rest day for her. She was required to work on Saturdays, and when she refused to go to work on Saturdays, she was fired from her job, and she was not given any compensation or help with finding a new job because they said, that's your fault. You decided not to work on Saturday. But when she challenged it to the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court in this case, 1963, sided with her, saying the state of South Carolina, again, has to give a compelling reason. Why does she have to work on Saturdays when that is the Sabbath for her religion? So I could go into many, many more examples, but in the interest of time, we'll pause there and open it up. But the point is that we always have these confrontations because the states can pass different laws and they can rule on them differently. But the Supreme Court, after siding with the states for many decades, has now decided to align with individuals and give you more protections against state laws that try to restrict your freedom. Go ahead, Professor.
Stop showing.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-oh, did we lose him?
No.
You want to catch them up? He's on mute. There, hold on.
Wasn't there a case recently on this with a USPS postal worker?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, we pulled up the slides while he's doing that. And if you guys can stay a couple minutes, great. And if not, I understand. I'll stay and talk to them.
Sorry for that. I had a technical difficulty. I couldn't turn my mic on, but it seems like I could now.
Okay, we understand.
So, yes, bueno, profesor, en esta parte de la intervención bueno, primero nos presentó una estadística donde se aclara que el 70% de la población de Estados Unidos profiesa una religión cristiana, solamente el 2% son judíos y el 2% musulmanos. Y después, en este contexto, nos presentó dos casos. Primero, un caso de 1940, Cantwell contra Connecticut, donde la Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos aclaró que un Estado no puede restringir la libertad religiosa si no puede ofrecer una justificación, una razón específica para la restricción. El caso, en ese caso, el punto era que la persona quería ser autorizada a ir a las puertas, a tocar las puertas de las habitaciones para presentar su fe, su religión, y el Estado había intentado prohibir este ejercicio, y de parte de la Corte Suprema, en cambio, se tuteló el derecho. Y el otro caso de 1963 era un caso de una señora que había sido despedida porque, por razones de su religión, no podía se negaba a ir a trabajar los sábados. Y este caso también llegó a la Corte Suprema. Sorry, Professor, can you just repeat to me and to us what was the final decision on the case Sherbert versus Werner?
Yes, they sided with Scherber, with the
Ok.
yes.
Entonces, al final, en este caso también la Corte Suprema tuteló el derecho de la señora como amparo de la libertad religiosa de la misma. Thank you very much, Professor. I didn't get it if that was the last part of your intervention, of if there is
At this point, I'd love to take questions because I'm going to have to let my students go to their next class.
Of
So
course.
I can stay as long as you want, but I want to hear questions from your audience.
Thank you very much. And well, first of all, I'm gonna just say goodbye to your students and thank them again for joining us today in this event. Bueno, esta era la presentación del profesor, el cual ahora está a nuestra disposición para preguntas que se quieran hacer. Sus estudiantes se excusan porque tienen otra clase ahora, pero el profesor sí puede seguir acompañándonos en la última parte. De este evento. Ya están llegando algunas preguntas aquí en el chat, pero yo quería aprovechar la ocasión para extenderle un saludo al profesor Oscar Ariza, que veo que se pudo conectar, y quien se encuentra de director encargado del Instituto Internacional de Investigaciones Jurídicas. Profesor Ariza, buen día, gusto verlo con nosotros. No sé si quiera decir algunas palabras, si me puede escuchar bien, y mientras yo voy recolectando las preguntas que están llegando.
I see the comment that some of the students know about Italy.
Yes, and okay, we have the first question from Roberto Gareto. Some of the students observed that in the map of religious restriction is talking about students that, as I mentioned before, are following us and are listening to your presentation remotely. They observed that in the map of religious restriction, Italy is white and France is light orange. And they noted that France implements a principle of secularism of the state, which may imply some religious restrictions in general, ban or wearing scarves, for instance, in schools. Italy, however, is a concordant country, and it is on a specific agreement with the Catholic Church that establishes specific privileges, which only in the case of further agreements with specific privileges, religious community are extended to other religions. So can this not be considered a significant religious restriction? And there is a final reference to Spain, which is shows the situation similar to that of Italy. What do you think, Professor, regarding this question, which is already presented in English, so we can listen to your answer, and then I will translate.
Yes, well, I'll admit that is out of my expertise, even though I introduced the map. I'm not an expert on religious freedom in Europe, but I agree. That's true. That can be seen as anyone who is not in the majority religion of that country is going to face potential restrictions and even discrimination. Yes, that can be considered a significant restriction. That if you're non-Catholic in Italy, you will have less freedom of movement. Anyway, the examples given are excellent.
Bueno, para traducir, la pregunta iba encaminada al hecho de que en el mapa que nos mostró el profesor, por ejemplo, Italia se encuentra en blanco, lo que implica una restricción baja o inexistente a la libertad religiosa, mientras que en Francia hay un color como amarillo. Y la pregunta radica en que eso puede parecer extraño porque Francia tiene una tradición secular mucho más fuerte que Italia, y por ejemplo en Italia hay un concordato entre el Estado y la religión católica. También se han hecho acuerdos con otras religiones, pero en Italia hay ese mecanismo de los acuerdos entre el Estado y las religiones, mientras algo que en Francia no existe, y entonces en el mapa Italia está en blanco y Francia está en amarillo. Y bueno, sobre eso el profesor comentó que efectivamente, y eso es interesante también, de parte como italiano, ¿no? Que efectivamente una perspectiva de Estados Unidos, esa idea de que haya acuerdos entre el Estado y las religiones, se ve como algo, como algo que posiblemente en los Estados Unidos se consideraría una violación de la libertad religiosa. Vamos a ver aquí. Bueno, me están solicitando un estudiante de la Universidad de Cartagena a hacer una pregunta. El estudiante Osvaldo, adelante Osvaldo, si quieres hacer la pregunta con micrófono, le damos la palabra.
¿Me escuchan? Sí, me escuchan.
Sí.
Gracias, doctor Daniel Foreman, y a usted, doctor Perona, por esta importante exposición y por hacernos esa traducción. Mi pregunta es, en Colombia, en el año 2014 se implementó una política pública encaminada a la protección de la libertad religiosa y de culto. Dicha política en Colombia se implementó porque el Estado reconoció que tiene una deuda histórica con el sector religioso. Entonces, esa política en nuestro Estado, que hoy se sigue implementando, tiene como objetivo buscar que los actores religiosos puedan participar en los diferentes factores de la sociedad. Uno de esos objetivos que el Estado colombiano se trazó en esa política pública es precisamente revisar la normatividad en Colombia acerca relacionada con el sector religioso, y esa normatividad encuadrarla o modernizarla a las actuales situaciones que hoy los sectores religiosos. Entonces, en Colombia, a partir de esa política pública de gobierno, se ha establecido que los actores religiosos, los grupos religiosos, son muy importantes para la reconstrucción del tejido social. Mi pregunta es, ¿qué acciones o qué políticas en Estados Unidos han implementado los estados federales para que puedan incluirse y hacer partícipe a los actores religiosos en las decisiones que posiblemente ellos no toman, sino toman el Congreso, y que pueden llegar a afectar a ellos? Muchas gracias.
Okay, tell us, Professor, what did Osvaldo say?
Disculpe. Gracias, Osvaldo, por la pregunta. Voy a traducirla. Well, our student is mentioning a public, there's a policy in Colombia that was adopted in order to support the participation of religious actors in the public debate, and there is the idea that it is a good thing to encourage the participation of religious actors in the decision-making process at the legislative level, at the level of the adoption of political measures. And given your presentation, the student was asking is if there is something like that in the United States, maybe especially at the not at the federal level, but at the level of the states, if the states have implemented some policy to support the participation, encourage the participation of religious actors in the decision-making process, and if this is be compatible with the U.S. Constitution.
Excellent question. So I think I would say two things. One is representatives are selected through elections in the democratic process. And so there's no specific seat or designation for somebody from a particular religion to be involved in government decision-making. They have to get elected or appointed to the position. And the truth is, it is harder for a non-Christian to get elected in some positions than it is for a Christian. So we do have that issue of making sure there are enough people and religions represented. So anyway, it's up to the democratic process to decide. But secondly, if you do not have an elected person from your religion, we have many interest groups in the United States, pressure groups, associations that form together to advance the interests of their religion. The cases that we could talk about, many of them are Jehovah's Witnesses. They were not in elected office, but they hired lawyers to push their interests forward. Now we have a Muslim association in the United States that goes to the legislative capitals and advocates for policies that will not discriminate. So the two-part answer is, one, you have to win the election to have a seat at the table. But two, the other way is through outside associations trying to put pressure on the government officials to pass policies.
Thank you very much. Bueno, dos puntos de respuesta. Primero que bueno, no hay una visión parecida a la visión colombiana que se estaba presentando por parte de Osvaldo, y que el mecanismo que se ve normal en Estados Unidos para que una religión esté representada es a través de las elecciones. ¿Sí? Entonces, los candidatos se presentan y pueden, obviamente, en su visión política también incluir a temas religiosos, y dice el profesor que, sin embargo, es muy difícil que gane las elecciones a alguien que no sea cristiano. Y por el otro lado, en cambio, los grupos, sobre todo los grupos no cristianos, que son minorías, lo que han hecho es ejercer presión, hacer lobby, por así decirlo, pero no solamente informar, sino también se han constituido en asociaciones y en grupos de presión, y a veces han contratado abogados para avanzar sus pretensiones. Esas son las dos vías que se dan en los Estados Unidos o a través de las cuales los grupos religiosos toman fuerza e interactúan. There is another question in the commentaries. A student asks how it is possible to reconcile respect for religious freedom of parents with the dignity of the person, and specifically teenage children in the family sphere, with respect to personal, sentimental, and sexual choice. So, freedom of religion within the family.
Another excellent question. So, in general, children do not have legal rights under the age of 18, minors in the United States. For most purposes, they are under the control of their legal guardian, parents or other legal guardian. So and I think that's the case in most countries around the world, that teenagers don't have explicit legal rights separate from their family. That said, this is a very important topic in the United States right now, as we have states with different laws on whether or not a person is allowed to transition their gender to another gender, whether they have to have the parents' permission or not. It gets very complicated because some states are allowing the children to have more choice, Other states like Florida, where we are, and Texas, for example, are prohibiting any discussion of this dignity of teenage children and their choice. So my answer is, unfortunately, for the most part, teenage children do not have legal rights, and that makes this issue even more difficult because some states are passing laws to target them, and they don't have legal recourse.
Bueno, la pregunta en este caso viene encaminada a cómo se puede conciliar o reconciliar la libertad religiosa de unos padres con las decisiones de los hijos que de pronto en materia personal, sentimental o sexual puedan estar no estar de acuerdo con las creencias religiosas de los padres. Y bueno, la respuesta es que en Estados Unidos hay un debate al respecto. Por lo general no se reconoce mucha libertad a los menores en este caso. Sin embargo, hay algunos estados donde se está empezando a ampliar esos derechos que los menores tienen, también en temas, por ejemplo, de transición sexual, pero en otros estados como por ejemplo Florida o el Texas, en cambio estas discusiones no se dan o sí se dan y cuando no están generando cambios a nivel legislativo. Entonces hay también un tema de fuerte diferencia entre los diferentes estados. Thank you very much. Vamos a ver si let's see if there are other questions from the audience. Vamos a ver si hay otras preguntas, otras intervenciones que se quieran hacer. Igual ya el tiempo que nos habíamos dado se ha acabado. Bueno, Professor Foreman, I think that this was it. Thank you very much for your participation today, to your students again. We had a good participation from the University of Cartagena, both people online, people in presence. We had participation from Italy as well, a professor with students there. We had questions both from Colombia and from Italy, so I think it was a successful event. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us, and we hope, of course, that this would be the first of many interactions between the University of Cartagena and the Berry University. Muchas gracias al profesor Foreman por la presentación. Hemos tenido una buena participación. El profesor ha estado con sus estudiantes en los Estados Unidos. Se conectaron personas de los Estados Unidos, desde Colombia también. Desde Italia hemos tenido un docente con sus estudiantes en clase conectado y he presentado preguntas. También tuvimos preguntas desde la Universidad de Cartagena, entonces un evento exitoso, un evento, bueno, multidioma, que esperamos sea el primero de una serie más amplia de eventos que podremos hacer con el profesor y con la Berry University de Miami. Y nuevamente, de parte del doctor Jessica Garrido de la Rosa, director del Instituto, y del director encargado, profesor Oscar Ariza, agradecerles a toda la participación. Nos pueden seguir al Instituto Internacional de Investigaciones Jurídicas a través de sus redes sociales y, como lo mencionaba al comienzo, este evento ha sido grabado y será montado en la plataforma del Instituto. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Professor. Muchas gracias a todas y todos.
Thank you. Gracias.
Nos vemos esta mañana y que tengan un feliz almuerzo.
Excellent. Buen día. Buen tarde.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.
Todos.